In this lesson, we'll continue adding detail to the front face of our walkie-talkie. We're going to take the curves we created previously, and we're going to use those to cut into our main body. So I'm currently in my front view, and you see the curves we have created. For this, I can switch off my underlay momentarily, and I'll switch on the main body. Now notice, because we created our curves right at the 0, 0 point of our world, when I switch on the main body, the curves actually disappear. So let's switch off the main body for just a second. And I'm going to add a new layer down at the bottom here. So I've highlighted volume knob, and that way when I add a new layer, it adds it below it. And I'm going to just call this face curves. And let me make this bright red color so it's easy to tell what I have. Now remember, we do have a layer called curves already, but we have a lot of our initial construction curves here. And I just want to separate this out and have this be all detail curves. So I'm going to drag from the right to the left and box select those. Right click on the face curves layer and select change object layer. Then I deselect, and you can see the curves have changed to the color of the layer. I'll bring back the main body, and I'm going to bring the curves just out a little bit. So I could either do this in the perspective view, or it might be a little easier to do this in the right view. And I'm going to right click on face curves, and I'm going to choose select objects. That selects everything on that layer. And then using my gumball, which I have switched on, I'm just going to drag this red arrow and bring those just outside the body. I'm not too worried about the fact that we're no longer on our 0, 0 line. We're kind of finished with that reference at this point in the model. So when I'm working on this, I want to kind of work from the outside and kind of work in. So the first thing I'm going to do is select this main outer curve and then my 4 button curves. And I'll switch to my top viewport, and I'll explain why I want to do that. I'm going to extrude a surface into the body here, and we're going to use that to cut away from material. But I have to be very careful, because remember earlier we made these large holes, if I go into perspective viewport. So we made these large areas here. And if I drag this in too far, I'm actually going to be cutting inside these holes with this surface. So I want to work in the top view, and that lets me know that I've brought my surface in far enough over here that we're all the way inside the body, but not too far that we cut inside the Boolean areas that we cut out earlier. So again, I have my main bezel face, and then the 4 buttons. I'm ignoring the parts that are in the center for the moment. We'll cut those out next. So again, I go to top viewport, I'll go to solid, extrude planar curve, and I'll select straight. I want to make sure this is set to solid equals yes, and both sides equals no. So I'll just bring that in about that far. As I said, I want to stay out of this area here completely. So I'll bring that in about that far. And that should be far enough that these shapes are all completely contained inside the main body. We don't have any edges as the main body starts to fade away here. I don't want anything kind of sticking out. So that all looks good. All right, so now we'll select a Boolean split. Command line is asking me for the surface or polysurface that I want to split, and that's going to be the main body. I'll hit enter, and now it's asking for the cutting surface or polysurface. And that's going to be this main bezel area, and then my 4 polysurfaces that represent those 4 buttons on the device. I'll hit enter, and now I do have to take these and delete them. We switch off our face curves layer temporarily. So now you can see we see the outline, so we know this worked. And I'll make some new layers here. So I'll call this one face bezel. Make that kind of an orangey color. And I'll move this over to face bezel. So I select it, then right click on face bezel, change object layer. And then I'll take these buttons, and I'll just call them 4 buttons. On the new layer, change object layer, and let me just give that a different color so I can see it a little easier. So now we have those all set. And if I switch these off, you can see that sure enough we still have a solid. Because we did the Boolean split, it didn't just go in and cut the faces, it actually went in and continued to keep this as a solid, so we can still work and add fillets and things like that. Let me turn the main body off. and bring back our face bezel layer and bring back our face curve layer. So as I said, we're going to keep working here. So I'm going to take this curve, and I can do all of these at once. These curves. And I'm just going to drag these through, and I have my gumball switched on. So if I hold down Control, you see those little lines that let me know I'm actually extruding. Now when I extrude this way, I don't get capped objects. So that kind of works nicely for me in this instance. Might be a little easier. There we go. If we look at the back, you can kind of see what I've extruded through here. And those do pass all the way through, even though that curve is fairly close to the face. You can see they extend outside. So now I can take my face bezel, and by doing another Boolean split, and we use these pieces, enter, I can just drag select all of those and just hide those. And let me switch off my curve layer again. So now we have our button, outer bezel, inner bezel, and our LCD. So I'm going to make some new layers here. We got 4 buttons. I'm going to make a main button layer. And then before I hit enter, if I just hit tab, it'll go right into making a new layer for me, which is kind of nice. And I'll just call this Bez 1, tab, Bez 2, tab, and then LCD, and then hit enter. I'm going to make these all different colors, again, just to help myself kind of recognize things as I have them without having to refer to the list. And the colors can really be anything you like. There we go. And now I'm just going to select each object and move it to the appropriate layer. So that'll go to main button. This will go to Bez 1. That'll go to Bezel 2. And that will go to LCD. And if I bring back the main body layer and the 4 buttons, you can see, at least in this shaded view, that we've now got some delineation of the parts, and we can really see what's going on. If I switch to Control-Alt-R for the render mode, you can see not quite so much. It's very hard to tell what's going on in there. And the reason you can't tell what's going on in render mode is we need to add some fillet edges to all of our new parts to really make them pop. And we'll continue that in the next lesson.